free art lesson is going to be on 5 values. I've done a few of these free lessons on values, but what I want to do is I'm going to do an exercise that I usually do with my workshop people, is I have them paint on a newspaper using 5 values. And what that does is it trains the eye to see multiple values in 5 breakdowns. And the way I'm going to explain it, it's a little system. I've never heard it explained before. A lot of times when an artist teaches something, he's teaching a conglomeration of things that he's heard and grown up with and learned on his own, and he puts it all together and then he teaches it. But it's really an amalgamation of everything that he learned. Well, this I haven't heard before, and I don't think that I heard it taught, but it's breaking a painting down into 5 values, put the darkest dark on first, then bounce over to the lightest light, and then go back to the second darkest dark, and then go to the second lightest light. Everything else is a number 3. So I'll kind of explain it real quick. This will probably be a 2-part 5-value free lesson, but I'm going to show you how to do that. You can break down a landscape that way. You can break down working from a photo in your studio. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 5 boxes up here. What we're going to do is we're going to train our eye to start using 5 values. And you can do this at home. When you don't really feel like painting one day, just take a newspaper out, black and white newspaper, and do some of these exercises, and it'll really help you to train your eye. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box, another box, and then another box. And what this is going to be is number 1. This will be number 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix paint and put it on here as a value scale. Then we're going to make piles of paint on our palette, and then we're going to go back and paint right on top of the photo, the black and white photo with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use purple for this exercise and say that that's my darkest dark. So what you do is you paint in your darkest dark. So I'm using cobalt violet, and I'll put cobalt violet in that block. Now that's as dark as I can get, cobalt violet. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and make piles on my palette. So you do this too, so that all you have to do is paint. You don't have to mix and paint. You can just paint. So there's number 5, okay? Number 1 is straight white. So we put straight white, and of course you can't see it on the white panel, but there's white, and we'll put a pile of white over here on the left side of our palette. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to take half and half. We're going to mix some of the violet with some of the white and make a medium value that's halfway between here and here. So that's the number 3. Now I don't know if that's going to be right. We'll have to do the 2 and the 4 and then tweak it a little bit to see. But anyway, there's a number 3 value. So then you take number 3 and you add a little bit more violet to it to make it a number 4. So as you can see, that's a little bit darker than the number 3, but not as quite as dark as the number 5. So then we do the same thing. We make a really nice pile of number 2. So that doesn't sound good. Number 2 here is halfway between number 3 and number 1. So when you squint, you can see how it goes from white all the way down. Now it looks to me like 3 is a little bit too much like 4, so I'm going to lighten 3 just a little bit so that I can see it now. That's a little bit better. When you squint, you should be looking at this squinting, because I always squint when I paint. That way I can see values better, and it looks like it's got a nice little step down. So I add a little bit more, I add a little white to my number 3 pile, and I should be good to go. Now on this exercise, what you do is you identify in the photo number 5. Okay, so that's really easy to do. Now this photo is out of a newspaper, so it's a little bit washed out, but you know that if we were looking at a really good photo on a piece of nice glossy paper, that this would be the darkest dark under his arm. So that's what we're going to paint in right now. We're going to take paint and paint it right on the photo, and we're going to paint in all the areas that we know should be the darkest darks. And this is what you do when you're painting. paint all the 5s in. And all I'm doing is just covering it up. I don't have to be exact. I'm just going right up to what I think will be all the darkest darks. I think probably right in there. A little shadow right there, surely under the arm, the sleeve. The little shapes that are the darkest darks. Probably right there, some laces. You know, I'm having to imagine because this is a really, really grayish photo. But I'm just putting in a few of the dark darks. Okay, so pretty much I think that's all the really dark darks. Might be a little bit down his hand. Okay, now we go over to the lightest light. We go to number 1. We paint everything in, which is just basically white paint. And we paint in everything that we know is a number 1 value. Now remember, I'm doing values here. So I'm painting in everything that I know is being hit by the light. And let's see, probably the top of his tennis shoe. And notice how I'm using my brush. I notice a lot of people in workshops work with a brush like a pencil. This is not a pencil, this is a brush. That's why they make the handle so long, so that you can work off the back of it. But you get a nice looser feel if you work off the back of the brush. But watch what happens when I get all the lights in. I'm going to put all the lights. Let's see, I'm going to leave. Should I do that? I can always change it later. I think I'll make that a number 2. No, I'm going to go ahead and make it a number 1. What you're doing is you're training your eye to identify what shapes should be what value. And that's what this whole purpose of this exercise is so that you can train your eye to pick out values. So there, you know, the darkest dark's really easy to figure out. The lightest light is really easy to figure out. Now we go to the one that's a little bit harder. We've only got 2 more to do, because once we do these 2, which is number 4 and number 2, everything else is a number 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint in the number 4s. So let's make sure we got lots of number 4. So I look and I say, okay, what's the second darkest dark? So I squint and I see that the second darkest darks are here, here, along the top of that. This is pretty dark underneath his chin, down here. This shirt. You see, I'm painting over all the little lines and everything too, because I'm not really concerned about them too much. All I'm trying to do is fill in the second darkest darks. So let's see, under his hand, this fella's hand right here is pretty dark. This little bit of his pants, and this ball. Looks like the ball is pretty much okay. All right, so there's the number 4. Now we go back in and say, what is the second lightest light? This is when it gets a little bit tricky, because we're getting on down there now. We're trying to get the second lightest light. But if you stay in order, you'll be okay. It's when you get out of order and you get confused and you start looking at this thing as what it is, a bunch of mishmash of shapes, you'll start to get scared. So don't do that. So we're working on number 2, so we paint all the second lightest lights. And we just make sure that we paint all the second lightest lights in. So we know that this is part of his pants right there. Let's see, what else is pretty light here? This pants right here look pretty light. We're just trusting now that this thing's going to work out, aren't we? Okay, see, that's going to be dark. This is pretty light right here. This is his hand going down on the ground. Got a little armband on. And let's see, what are we on? Second lightest lights. Probably that skin right there, right along the ball. His leg. Okay, maybe this little piece of hand and that. Okay. And let's see, that looks like that might be a number 2. No, that's probably a number 3. So everything else is a 3, let's assume. Then we'll go and we'll figure out what we need to change to make it read right. So we're going to make a number 3 up. Be sure we keep it at number 3 and paint everything else in that isn't painted in. That's not dark enough. There's got to be a little difference between 2 and 3. Let's put a little more in there and make it a good 3. So we're going to paint all this. It's not quite reading right. We got to do the floor and the hand up under his arm, on his head. Okay, this is number 3. I'm just basically painting in everything else as a number 3. This may be a little confusing right in this section. I might have to do something with that. Let's make that a number 5 right along his leg so I can show that's his leg right there. Okay. All right, now all the values are in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And when you're up close on it, because it's so fragmented, it's hard to see, but I'm sure from where you're looking at it, it probably looks like a couple ball players, or so you can tell it's a couple guys doing something. And that, if you can start with this, you can if this was in color and you were going to come back and tweak shapes and everything, you'd be okay. But look how just painting right on the newspaper with 5 values makes that read right. It looks like a guy down on the ground. You can kind of tell they're basketball players. One guy over here on top, over top of him, trying to grab the ball. So that's what you do, whether you're working on a landscape out there plein air or you're working from a photo and you're trying to paint it up here. If you'll break it down into 5 values, it's a whole lot easier to get started and block it in. Hope you enjoyed this free lesson. If you'd like to see more of my work or find out about me, you can go to MikeRooneyStudios.blogspot.com.